This is your host, Brent Sargeant. This is the We Were on a Break series podcast, and we are happy to introduce podcast extraordinaire. Her first podcast, Shelly. Let us know who you are, what you're doing right now in the crypto or compliance space, and give us kind of your 2-minute, 3-minute intro of where you've come from and where you are now.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Shelly Forde. My background is quite eclectic. I came up through more of a project management feel for complying to regulatory compliance. Then I switched over into the financial sector because that's where my background, that's where my degree is in. And I stumbled into compliance. I saw someone else doing it. And I'm like, hey, that looks like project management stuff. I could do that. I like bossing people around. Just kidding. I do actually. But I kept it going. I took the certification, and now I love shiny new things. And I feel like fintech for me, the NFT, the metaverse, it kind of speaks to the 80s baby in me, some way, somehow. So I've just been digging in mostly on my own. It's more of a hobby than anything else. Right now, I'm trying to understand it from a regulatory perspective because I think that's going to be extremely beneficial to me and to my jurisdiction. I'm living in the Turks and Caicos Islands. So I feel that, NFT is going to make me just bubble with excitement because of all it started off with a lot of artistic approach, which I love, but the ingeniousness behind what people are doing, selling a house as an NFT was just crazy to me. And I want to be one of the people that are getting involved in it just to promote it, but also to keep it on track and keep it on side.
You mentioned something very interesting. You're from the Turks and Caicos. I feel when people think of like Caribbean hubs, they're thinking about Grand Caymans and maybe some tax sheltering incorporations out of the BVI, British Virgin Islands, and other places. Turks and Caicos for me is like my home for vacationing. So talk a little bit about like what's the financial industry like there? What's the compliance? Is it small? Is it large? Is it the hub for the Caribbean? Give us a little bit of I would say a synopsis of what the Turks and Caicos and how it plays into the Caribbean.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned about tax haven. Every time we hear Turks and Caicos Islands mentioned on a TV screen, and we like, what did they just say? It's some kind of tax haven business. I'm like, we're known for other things. But yeah, so in the Turks and Caicos Islands, I'd have to say that we're one of the smaller players in regards to size, but that doesn't make us any smaller in regards to our devotion to compliance. Our structure, our regulatory structure is very robust. We've updated it as recently as 2018, 2019. I know there's talks for continuous revamping of our legislation. Because of the size of our jurisdiction and being dependent on the United Kingdom, I wouldn't say we're as adventurous as some other nations to jump into something like fintech, but we're not averse to it. Trust me, there are big conversations happening behind the curtains that obviously I can't talk about. I don't even know the details of. But you pay attention, you keep your ears to the ground, and you get a little excited when you hear, for example, our Honorable E.J. Saunders. He is the financial minister, I believe, of our country. And we already know that he owns a RegTech company. So we're all excited here. Like, okay, the RegTech guy is on the space, and we know he has a fintech company that he's planning to develop and release. So if he's on side with it, then something's got to be in the bubbly for us. But right now, there's not a lot of buzz talk about fintech. There's an appreciation for it more as a casual conversation, not necessarily as a governmental public sector conversation. But I know it's coming, and I want to be extremely prepared for that.
How are the islands made up? Because we've seen like Barbados and Bermuda are like going headfirst metaverse, and they have embassies in the metaverse. They have their red shorts when they come up to the crypto conferences here in Canada. So they're definitely leading the charge with even Canadian firms like I know Shift Network and other people that work for organizations like that are part of this kind of movement to help the Caribbean. Is it more of a unison approach where all the islands would get together and try to form like a fintech or crypto hub? Or are you going to see more isolated scenarios where it's the one-off islands leading the charge and others kind of fall in line when it's appropriate for them?
No, we operate in unison here in the Turks and Caicos Islands. So even if you have something happening in the capital, Grand Turk, or happening in Providenciales, which is the more populated island in the Turks and Caicos, more known island in the Turks and Caicos, if you something happen for one island, the entire country benefits, and that's how our government tends to operate. So they try to do things across the board. So if you hear anyone talking about anything in the fintech space, NFT or metaverse, it's going to be across the board for sure.
I love what you've done. So we've been, I think, close connections for maybe 2 years. As soon as I found out you lived in Turks, I was like, okay, I want to get back there. So then maybe you can hook me up with a conference of some sort down there. But you've really established yourself when it comes to content creation and really taking charge of your own career and reaching out. One thing that caught my attention was the Kafka Scholarship. I was a judge there. I got to see all the amazing videos, and you were one of the recipients of that scholarship, and your video was absolutely amazing. Talk to me through that process. How did you know about this scholarship? What made you apply? Is there a reason why you applied? Was there any kind of hesitancy to apply because maybe you felt it was better for somebody else that may have lacked more more finances than you had? Talk me through that kind of process.
Yeah, the thing is I started asking more and more questions about financial technology because while I've had so much experience in non-financial and financial business, fintech is a subset that crosses all of those platforms. So I wanted to get more tech into my financial experience. I did some research and I started asking questions, and I believe I actually found out about it from you saying, hey, go check out the website and see what's going on. And I was like, what is he talking about? You know, ACAMS doesn't give scholarships. So I did a Google search and found it in like 2 seconds. I'm like, how does no one know about this? I think my hesitancy was a number of reasons. You know, I live in a small country, so sometimes I might see myself as a big fish in a small pond. So then when I see myself outside of my country, I play the devil's advocate on myself and play that negative card. Oh, they're not going to pick me, and like millions of people around the world are probably applying for this. Like, who's Shelly Forde in comparison to this? And I've had this mentality in 2021 where it's just like propel forward. That's like my motto to myself. Every time I'm like doubting myself or questioning myself, I'm like, just do it. Okay, if you fail, then you fail. At least you tried. So I did the video and I was like, you know, I felt that if I were able to succeed with getting the scholarship, it would not only be the benefit of taking the exam, naturally would open my eyes to understand more about fintech and more about like payments and blockchain technology and things of that nature. But I also felt that it would open up a network, which I think is bigger for me because I have all my accolades already. I more need that exposure to networking to have that experience through the eyes of others, because in my jurisdiction it's a lot smaller. And yes, I've experienced a lot, but I can experience so much more through increasing my platform of who I know and learning what I know through them.
I love it, and yeah, following me is always a good is always a good decision to make on LinkedIn. So we'll definitely make sure we highlight that in my show notes. But
yeah, no, it's like Stevens has posted something, drop everything. What did he post?
It's funny because when I saw that, I'm not sure exactly when ACAMS had approached me if they had already launched the scholarship. But it was definitely something I wanted to share, especially with my African American and Canadian communities, is that it's so important to take advantage of these opportunities. One thing I did see, and I did want to highlight for someone like yourself, and maybe you can kind of talk me through the video process, was, you know, the lack of following directions. ACAMS didn't really have much guidance. They really only gave 3-point form notes. This is what you had to do. This is how long you had to do it. And this is how you had to submit it. And one of the things I saw was that an increased amount of people that were ineligible just from not probably following or paying close enough attention to the directions. You know, whether the video didn't fully upload and it was only 10 seconds long, whether it was 4 minutes long, whether they didn't even upload a video. Talk me through, how do you go through that process of making sure you're checking the box before you submit something and working up the will to even create a video?
Yeah, I think I ended up reading, I think I looked at it like 4 times before I actually started. I think when you have a background in compliance and project management, you're a little, a bit of a stickler for the steps. So I wanted to make sure that I understood. I'll be honest with you. When I looked at the application and saw a video, I was like, nah, this is not going to happen. Shelly does not put her face on camera for people to see, you know? So I was like, you know what? It's not a big deal. And I think if you had seen the first 3 recordings of me just being like, ugh, that was horrible. Delete. Like, I think it was like 4 or 5 recordings that I just like criticized myself on. But yeah, no, I went through the process of understanding what it was they were asking for. I wrote myself a little script is what I generally try to do. And I've learned, because I'm a researcher, ask me any question, I'm going to go straight to Google and become an educated to Google University graduate of whatever that is. But one of the things that they always tell you is when you write scripts, don't memorize it. Have an idea of where you're going with your conversation, but don't necessarily read it verbatim because it comes across that way. And I hope that it didn't, because I did like repeat it to myself maybe 2 or 3 times. And then I just spoke somewhat from the heart, somewhat from the script, so that I can address what they asked me for, but also talked about the key points that I wanted to raise.
That's super interesting. You talked, something I picked up on, you talked about not wanting to show your face. You know, I have a sister that was so hesitant to even put her picture on LinkedIn, scared of the stigmatism, being black, being a woman.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's an immense amount of hurdles. And I don't want to venture down this George Floyd era of victimization, but maybe just touch on maybe some of the things, the struggles that you felt in your career or working your way up in compliance, and maybe some advice you can give to professionals in the same situation where they might be new to compliance, but they might be subconscious about who they are, what they stand for, or the color of their skin.
Yeah, I think I have to start with Facebook and MySpace and those things that came up a long time ago and what it was used for back then. And when we started off with those platforms, we put everything out there because we didn't know what it was all about. And then we got criticism. An innocent picture became this like blackmailing device for a future employer or someone that you work with or a friend, et cetera, just putting you in a particular box. So I can say personally for me, I shut myself down when it came to putting myself out there. And that's difficult for me because I like meeting people. I like being weird and different and unique and silly. And I found myself getting criticized for being who I was. And that's one of the things I appreciate with LinkedIn, because it's like, all are welcome, weird or not weird, you know, in a box or not in a box, you're welcomed here, and you're not as aggressively judged. Not to say that you won't be, but you're not as aggressively judged. And that's actually something that's very important if you're going to be in compliance. You're going to have to put yourself out there and put your foot down. So if your, board of directors come across to you and say, well, we don't like your recommendation, and you know for a fact by law this is something that they should or should not do, you have to be able to stand on your own scruples and say, hey, this is something that I'm putting on record that should or should not happen. And I think when you're talking about a female, a black person, young, and you're in a high position dealing with people who are not black, not female, not young, it's anything and everything you say gets on a chopping block. And you can't help but the way that it comes across to you, especially when your peer, maybe the same age as you, but not the same color as you, or maybe the same color of you, but not the same gender, et cetera, and they're getting listened to for the same sentence that you said 2 seconds ago, it starts to play on your emotions, it starts to play with your mind. So it's extremely important to recognize, first and foremost, who you are. You need to know that you know what you're talking about and have that confidence, so that it doesn't matter whether you're on Facebook or going to the board of directors and saying, hey, this is something that needs to happen, or this is who I am, that the repercussions that come after it are the repercussions that come after it because you know who you are and you know what you said is correct and you know that you understand what you're saying. It would be different if someone comes to you and says for one reason or the other that your advice or your suggestion was wrong, and you can have an adult conversation about it. But sometimes I can tell you from experience that they don't come at you with a law or based on it's, I think you're not ready yet. You know that face? I think you need a little bit more time to study that. And I'm like, how many more years you want me to study? You know?
How do
Yeah.
you deal with that though? Like I'm assuming like you, just like any other woman, are going to be faced with maybe even like sexual comments. Like I know a lot of women in the industry talk about like when they're in the boardroom with their male counterparts, it's like they hear like obscene things like, oh, you brought your girlfriend with you, like silly things that people are saying. And maybe this is in different cultures. But I think still to this day, I'm seeing on LinkedIn, people are still going through the same stigmatism when they're going to raise capital. You know, people will address the male partner versus the female partner. Is there something that goes through your head on how to deal with it? Like, do you take a deep breath? Do you make sure to like get in there and say, hey, this is like, hey, I'm here. I have ideas. I expect you to listen to me the same. Do you call it out? Or do you just try to find a way to kind of finesse yourself into the conversation and kind of ignore what they're, almost ignoring them and their actions? I'd love to know how you navigate those waters.
Yeah, I think because I've worked in the US, I've worked in the Caribbean, and I've had connections with people around the world. And you have to read the room, to be honest with you. You can't always assume that everyone is out to get to you necessarily. And sometimes people's sentences, though they may think it's an innocent sentence, you know the truth that it wasn't. Calling them out on it, what benefit does that make for you? Like what benefit to the cause of what you're trying to achieve? How does it improve the situation? You're just going to get them to be extremely defensive, completely off the topic of whatever it is you were trying to say, and they're just going to say, but that's not what I meant by it. You know those sentences that it's just right on the tip of being racist or gender discrimination or ageism. And it's funny that I've experienced all three. So usually I tend to read the room. I always give people the benefit of the doubt when I'm trying to have conversations with them. Especially, I have an attorney's background. I'm training to be an attorney. So I always know that there's sentences you can't take it to court. You can say it up and down that it's factually based, but if it's not factually based, there's no sense arguing it. You're only going to stress yourself out. You're only going to annoy your family talking about it for hours. That I can't believe this person said this to me. So it's better to just read the room, focus on the issue at hand, and justify the issue at hand, and just try to, delete all of that fluff. The only time I deal with something like that head on is when I can see that it's persistent in nature and that it needs to be addressed. And I've had that happen before where a superior person came across a very particular way. And at first I was like, no, that's not what he meant. And then it happened again, and then it happened again. And then eventually I was like, okay, enough is enough. Like I know that I'm not dreaming this up. This needs to be addressed. But in those situations, you deal with it separately. So you deal with, if it's work-related, you deal with the work-related issue and kind of not ignore, but focus on the work. When you realize that the other issues are continuous and at play, you call a meeting or you pull them aside and say, okay, now that we've addressed the actual work-related issue, I need to talk to you about how you're treating me. And I think one thing that people don't really understand, and I understand the fear factor, I'm the biggest one to talk about my fears of the repercussion of speaking out. There's nothing bad that really happens afterwards. Okay, yeah, you lost your job, or you got a demotion, or you didn't get a promotion, or...
It's so funny. I thought you were going to go another round. There's nothing bad. They agree with it. You're like, no, I lost my job.
No, like, I'm talking about worst case scenario, my friend.
I agree. Hey, I'm a big proponent. I'm on LinkedIn every day speaking my mind, and I'm like, the worst that they can do is make me lose this job. I'm smart. I'll get another job, but they can make me lose this particular job. And it's one of the reasons I love being my own boss now. Is and it's not because I want to say all these controversial things, but I notice when I speak, especially to women, they're like, I'd love to talk about A, B, and C, but I also work for somewhere. I work at a tech company. I work at a crypto company, and I don't want to be alienated from this position or future positions because they have the mindset too. Well, the same people that are kind of holding me down at this particular employer, I kind of scattered across the whole. This is an industry problem. One thing I'd want to know is that, and we'll go back to what the worst case scenarios are. Has there any been the situation where a coworker, whether male, female, has kind of chimed in and said, no, I like what Shelly was saying. Let's go back to that, to maybe a micro. Have you seen any kind of heroic acts of people trying to level that playing field, knowing it's uncomfortable, or are people just kind of shaking their head, going along with whoever's going to be the biggest decision maker or whoever's kind of signing their paycheck?
I've had numerous working environments where we would have that, what do they call it? The water cooler conversations when you're all huddled around the coffee pot just chit-chatting or whatever. And we're all like, yes, Shelly, you're right. Preach, girl. And I'm like, okay, I got the whole team behind me. Let's do this. Then I go straight to my boss thinking I got like 50, well, not 50, but I got like 5 people behind me. And I'm like, well, sir, we have a complaint. And then after I make my whole like presentation, I've worked really hard on my points and everything. And then they're like, well, who else agrees with you? You seem to be the only one. And I'm like,
God, they're gone. They're back by the water cooler. They're out of the board. Did you see what Shelly just said? Oh, she gonna lose her job, girl.
Shelly is such a drama queen. She always bringing up trouble. And I'm like, but we were in this together. So I've had that happen to me a number of times. And I'm not the type of person to be like, well, this person said that they agreed. I would just say, well, I know it's a concern, and I can only say that they're probably uncomfortable to say it as well. And if something comes of it and it's, beneficial to all, great. If nothing comes of it, then at least I know I spoke my mind and it's on record. Because I do that a lot. Like, if I see a situation come up and I have a good HR team, I will call HR and say, okay, I need you to put something on paper before it happens. Don't put it as a complaint. Just say Shelly wanted to vent, whatever you want to call it, and put it on record. Just in case something does happen later on that they can see I've addressed it from my point of view first. And it once or twice it did prove extremely beneficial that I put something on record because the person tried to come after the fact. But
right.
Yeah,
I think that's important. I don't think people do that enough. People don't just kind of like highlight enough. And I don't really feel like HR is as engaged, especially in the market where we're in, where you're struggling to find new professionals. Like you have hundreds of positions available for each of these employers, especially in tech and crypto and fintech. They're really just managing the new inflow versus nurturing their existing relationships. And I think HR has to get more involved. There has to be more. I've never really seen HR act until something has gone wrong. So I think what you're saying of being proactive and just kind of highlighting like, hey, high level, these are some of the nuances I see, just something to keep aware about. Like when the complaint does come, they can cross references to like, yeah, Shelly did say something 3 months ago. We should have at least addressed it there or at least pulled that person aside and ask them like, hey, like we're hearing these things. Is there anything we could do to support your growth kind of thing?
Yes, well, I have to say, like, I have a friend here, Teresa Hall, and I know that she is a unique voice in the space of human resources. Like, she's trying to change that old school mentality where HR is for the company, and she's trying more to show that HR is for everyone. Because I know that a lot of people don't like to run to HR because HR represents the firm. They don't represent you. But it doesn't matter if you have a facility in place, whether it's the board or HR or whatever, especially when you're talking about compliance. I know a lot of people will say, well, I don't like to go to the board because they're not functioning correctly. It doesn't matter. If something gets investigated later, where's your proof that you actually at least went to the board? You didn't put that on them. You've left yourself open. So I put it out there. When they tell me, no, you need to delete that recommendation. Delete what?
You're an attorney at heart. They document everything because it creates a time. It creates a timeline, though, and I think that's what most important people. Usually, when people get caught off guard or they're fired, is that they haven't created a timeline of events that have taken place. And usually, that's why you see HR has a tough time, or even superiors have a tough time firing people, is because they can't just come one day and say, yeah, you're fired because of this. But there were several instances where they could have documented, this is what took place, this is the conversation we had, this is the action that we suggested. And if they had that in place, it would be easier to remove people from these scenarios. But they leave themselves liable from just firing somebody from one incidental, because people will come back with wrongful dismissal suits all day long. Yeah. Now, I know people are thinking, that's great, Shelly, you have a job. It's easy for you to voice your opinion and, be the proud speaker for the industry. But what about me? I'm trying to get a job. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. So how do you help people that maybe feel rejected, because I'm going to have an actual separate podcast talking about rejection. I might even record it later on today. So I want to hear your thoughts about rejection, and does that fuel you to be a better professional and say, okay, you're sleeping on me right now, or hey, maybe I'm not where I need to be at the time you were hiring. What's your thought about rejection, or possibly missing what you thought would be a dream job and then finding out later on it's the best thing that could happen to you, which usually is the case?
Yeah, it's usually the case. Well, I think people have to realize that when it comes to rejection, it's not about you. And I know it's easy to feel, because I was unemployed, right? It doesn't look so on my resume because I found other things to keep my income up to date, but I was unemployed and I was applying every which way, and everyone was like, oh, you'll get a job easily. After I made my decision and I left the firm that I was with, I was like, yeah, I'll get a job easily. I have all these accolades, I have all these experience, everybody knows who I am. But between not finding opportunities and when I found the opportunities, not even a rejection, nothing. It's been a year for some of those applications. I haven't even gotten rejected from them yet, A rejection would feel a little bit better. I think people need to just stay focused. That's what I did. I did a post the other day from something that Nilu suggested for me to do, which is to set out my goals. And I didn't really focus too much on the company. I didn't focus too much on, where I wanted to work. I focused more on the income. I wanted to make sure I had a certain income. And then I wanted to make sure that I enjoyed what I did. And so I put that energy out there. And I know for people who don't necessarily believe in positive energy and manifestation, I probably lost you. But for me, it's worked. I was one of those people saying, I remember when you invited me to that event with Henna, I was like, what? Manifest who? But it worked. Even on the smallest scale, it works, because what I found is that through all of those rejections, I was still able to maintain my positivity. Yes, there were days where I cried, hugged my dogs on the floor and cried because no one wanted me. But it didn't last long, because what I did try to focus on was, this job probably wasn't for me. This opportunity probably wasn't for me. And I just maintained my positivity. So I kept myself very, very busy through networking, a couple of side projects to keep the money turning. And granted, my situation fell into unemployment. It wasn't planned unemployment. So it wasn't like I had a lot of money to keep me going. I was living month to month, hoping that everything would be okay. Just my parents thought I was crazy. I'm like, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Right? But what I did is I made sure that I had a plan for each month, that I could at least say, okay, well, this month I'm okay and next month I'm okay. Great. And then what I did is I focused on positivity. I have all the accolades that I needed. I spoke to different people. What else could I do? What should I add to my resume? And thankfully, someone actually came to me and offered me an opportunity. And I found that I've spoken to a lot of people. If anyone's out there feeling like, oh, I've been unemployed for a couple of months or a couple of years, just go sit on LinkedIn. Just search through LinkedIn.
Preach it, my girl. Sit there. Just sit there. Just absorb. People don't like to absorb.
Reading through, because there are so many people who are either in your same bucket, obnoxiously willing to help you. LinkedIn is one space that I've noticed. You send somebody a short message, they'll be like, hey, I don't see that you're working right now. What's going on with you? And they might not be able to help you in that moment, but they're so encouraging that it's like, I got 100 rejections today, but it's okay because, Rebecca said everything's going to be fine. And she made me feel better about myself, saying that my resume is that good. So I think it's all about being positive, having the right type of positive people around you that understand about, promoting positivity, and at least having a plan to keep your self-focused and sustained for the 2 months ahead. Because that's what I did. I couldn't focus on more than 2 months. When you start thinking, what if I don't have a job next year? That's too far ahead. I digested 2 months. That's all I digested. And when 1 month fell, if it was May past, okay, now let's look at June and July, right? And that's all I did for the past year, and everything seemed to have worked out, thank God.
But let me pick apart two things that you said there. You
Yeah.
sent a note. Most 99% of people aren't sending notes when they connect. So by sending a note, I think that person realizes like, hey, this person's actually this person wants to make a connection. And usually in the note, I'm assuming you're saying why you're connected with them. You may have read a piece of their content. And I preach this all the time. If you're going to connect with somebody, read their people don't want to have energy drains. Nobody wants to let you pick their brain. But if you pick their brain without even asking them any questions, usually people are trying to, they're attracted to and want to connect with people that are putting out some sort of content, whether it's thought leadership, books, articles, webinars. You're going to them because you want more information, but you have to at least consume the information that they've put out there already. And I think most people I think we live in a society of instant gratification. People want the answers now. People are not getting their Google University degree. They're just like, and I went through this the other day when I was at the ACFCS conference, and people were like, well, what's the name of your podcast? And I simply said, you see my name there, Stephen Sargeant, go to Google and put an end podcast and see what comes up. And then come to me and ask me a question. And you should see the chat flood with how many responses. People are finding like old podcasts, new podcasts I did. I'm like, that changes the conversation. Now go to a podcast that you think might interest you. That's why podcasts have titles. And now find the one that might answer the question you have. And there was one connection I had that she sent me a message. And before I even got a chance to respond to her, she's like, don't worry, forget about it. I looked on your YouTube and you answered it in your AMA. Don't worry about it. Thank you so much. And then, like, I love when I tell them to go to my content, and all my content is around like, stop asking silly questions, do your own research. And then you never hear back from those people again usually, but that's awesome. I love people that are like willing to say, hey, you know what, you're right. I didn't do my research and now I'm coming back to you fresh. To end off this conversation, talk to me about your experience on LinkedIn. Like, what is it that you're seeing that maybe other people aren't seeing because they're only going there looking for jobs? What are some of the like maybe top 3 things that you're taking away from LinkedIn? And do you have that mindset that like one connection could change your entire career or professional life? Tell me about that.
No, I think that a lot of people do tend to look at LinkedIn as the career platform. And while it does generate that type of environment for people, if you go in with that mentality, the only analogy I can think of is like when you go on a first date, you can't think, oh, I want to get married. Because for some reason, if you never use the word marriage, he still picks up on that. And you've lost a potentially great guy because he's freaked out. Because you know how you guys get. Freaked out on the first date, she wants to get married. So it's kind of that same type of thinking. You can't go on LinkedIn with the assumption that you're looking for a job. Because even if you don't realize it, your mannerisms, your words, your actions, it's overwhelming. And I know that for me, I love helping people, but I'm not a recruiter. But if I see someone who's constantly just asking me that, I get a little turned off because I'm not able to offer you anything else. I can't offer you any type of advice because all you're interested in is the job. So I agree with you 100%. Anywhere I go, whether it's a job that I like or a person's podcast that I'm interested in, the first thing I do is look to see if they're on LinkedIn. And that's how I connect with them immediately. Like, I don't just say, oh, I saw we were on a break and it was cool. No, I say, oh, I remember seeing this particular person and she was unique in her industry and I loved how she talked about blah. And it opens up the door to recognize, okay, this person didn't just pull a Google name out of their hat. They actually listened to the podcast and actually connected with something that I said. And I know for me now, starting to do more and more content, it's such a big deal when someone's like, oh, I like this post. And you're like, oh, let's talk some more. Talk about me some more.
You'll give it, but if that person asks you, the same person asks you for a job, you've been like, like maybe just go search this person and follow this recruiter. But now it's like all they have to do, and like 20 minutes of research. Listen to their podcast, put it on 2 times speed. Your brain will get used to it. Trust me. Fly through the podcast. It sounds much better. I sound much better at 2 times speed as well. So listen to it 2 times speed. half an hour podcast, 15 minutes. Hey, get some exercise in. Even better, I used to listen to podcasts. Well, I knew everything I wanted to know about industry professionals just by going for walks and listening to their podcasts and taking quick notes about some things that caught my attention. And then when I went back to the person, instead of asking them general questions, I was like, hey, I listened to 9 of your podcasts. You said the same thing in 9 of those podcasts. But it never changed. As you change jobs, your message didn't change. And I found that super unique that, usually when people change jobs, they're like, oh yeah, Google. They're like, no, Meta, like Google's, but throughout this person's career, they had the same condemnation about building collaboration, coalitions, working together. And that never changed no matter where they worked or not matter what happened to where they were, the projects that we're working on. And I think that caught that person's attention. They're like, oh, they actually, that's their underlying message, right? Yeah. That's their ethos. And it's a little bit strategic, but I'm also, that's just something that came to me. There may be other things that I may have missed, but that one thing really stood out. So when someone approaches you about the content you're creating and they're taking out those little nuances that even surprised you when you heard the recording, it's a special moment, and that person can get any information they want from you at that point.
Yes, it's really true. And the minute I changed my mindset from I need a job from LinkedIn to I'm just trying to connect with people, the number of people who reached out to me, and I'm telling you, not everybody I reached out to was in the compliance space. A lot of them are just generic, fields that has nothing to do with me, but they posted something of interest, so I commented, and I try to be very genuine with my comments. And I started getting more and more people contacting me that were in compliance as well, or in fields that just promoted my business. So I think that's one thing that you have to pay attention to is your intention, and to be intentionally genuine when you're trying to reach out to people. Because if you're focused so much on getting a job, you're gonna stress yourself out when each and every contact doesn't turn into a job. And you're also going to stress out the people that you're trying to reach out to. And it just breeds this whole negativity, and you're not gonna wanna reach out to anyone anymore, and no one's gonna want to be responsive. But instead, if you're just genuinely going out there and saying, okay, I only have 50 contacts, let me increase that to 200 genuine people, you would be surprised at how that mental approach changes the type of connections that you get and the benefits that you get from it, and the potentially you being able to help other people. But
that's what it turns into, right? Like now you are helping others, like you who's just starting creating their content, was just in a similar situation last year. You have just as much advice to give as a recruiter, because the recruiter sees it from one side, you're seeing it from the trenches. So now, and that's why I explain to people, as you're creating content, people will be attracted. It doesn't matter whether you have a job, don't have a job, just starting out, student. People are always going to want to understand your scenario and how to get to your scenario. So I think I love the way you're putting out content. Another thing I captured was that how you're also engaging with other people's content. Because one disclaimer I tell people, everyone's like, yeah, I'm going to put out content tomorrow. And I'm like, well, yes, but nobody cares about what you have to say the same way you don't care about what they're saying. So be very cognizant of just putting out content and hoping people will reply, but you're not replying to other people's content or adding any value to their content. Right. So I think that's why you've done so successful. You have a familiar face, familiar hair. Your comments, as you said, are very engaging and intentional, and people recognize that. So when they see you comment, they're like, oh, she read the whole post. She doesn't say well said or interesting. She read the whole post. She added something more for the person that's also reading my content. That's what I love. I love comments that help educate people on top of what I've said from their own perspective. And I think that's the biggest form of compliment anyone can do for the content you put out.
Yes. Definitely.
Awesome. Last thoughts, couple takeaways for anyone just getting into the field, where you see crypto going, how you're going to get involved in the next few years. Give us some of your last hot takes.
Well, definitely for the people that are out there looking for a job and feeling frustrated, or have a job and want to get out of that field, positivity is the only thing I can tell you. Having that positive attitude, having a goal in mind is the only way you can survive all of those rejections or things not working out the way that you hoped. In regards to networking, like I said, you have to be able to recognize that not everyone is going to be able to get you a job today. But just because that contact can't get you what you need today, it doesn't mean that they can't help you a year from now, or you can't help them now, that they remember you when something great does come up. So that's extremely important. That's something that I've learned. Regarding fintech crypto, I think that it's going to continually pop up in the Caribbean, and I'm hoping if any of you Turks and Caicos Islanders are listening out there, that it becomes a big thing here in Turks and Caicos as well, because you've seen Jamaica, you've seen, Bahamas, Trinidad, all these other big players in the Caribbean are embracing or at least entertaining the concept of a CBDC. So I think that it's definitely going to continue to pick up. Yes, there's going to be ups and downs. I understand all of you risk averse people that are afraid to dive in, but this is not the first risky thing that's been playing out there. It's just the craziest one that I kind of think that's out there, and we can't wrap our heads around. So don't fear it. It's better to dive in, at least understand it at its basic core, so that when it comes knocking at your door and it's the only thing that you see, at least you can understand and be a player in that game.
Awesome. And don't hesitate to call me if you need me to come there in person to do a conference. I can bring, I'd love to bring my whole family for that experience for 1 week at the most prestigious hotel, Ritz-Carlton.
Oh yeah, it's lovely.
Have you been there?
No, but I've seen the outside of the building, and I'm like so afraid to go in. They might turn me around and saying, "We don't."
You gotta go for at least 1 day. You gotta spend at least 1 day at the Ritz. Next time I come down there, we'll go hang out for 1 day at the Ritz.
Yeah,
even if it's just grabbing coffee in the lobby until someone checks for our wristbands. Shelly, this has been amazing. Obviously, you're an amazing professional. You've done so much for the industry. I've seen you pick up on your content, and I encourage you. You're big on Instagram too, so I'm gonna put your Instagram notes because you always have some fun-loving content on Instagram. But I love your kind of hot takes and your generic thoughts. Well, not generic in a bad way. Generic thoughts about things that come to your.
They just pop out.
Yeah, that's what I mean. More random thoughts, because I think that's what I love about LinkedIn. It gets people thinking, and every time you give a personal thought, it resonates with somebody, because the good 40% of us are probably going through something similar. So I appreciate you taking the time. I'm glad this was your first podcast. And I know this was a good one. So this is probably going to be one of my most viewed podcasts. And we can't wait to have you back and do some amazing co-collaboration on content in the future.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem.